Good afternoon. Usually at this time of the semester, I am making a comment about the weather and the inadequacy of the air conditioning at certain times, but I think that's not appropriate today. It's kind of nice to be inside where it's warm and not blowing. I have a couple of announcements. The first one is that you may have heard about, and we've handed you out a flyer about something called Media Bias, Fact or Fiction, and Joe Hyams, who's the CEO of HonestReporting.com, is going to be presenting tonight, not in Warren Auditorium, but in the Green Center at 7 o'clock, and he's going to use Israel and Mideast regional reporting in using it as a context. So any of you who are available tonight, if you'd like to go, it's in the Green Center, the Green Music Center. I don't have the updated room. Do you know?
No, but there should be a sign on the outside of this door.
Right, there will be a sign on the outside of this door. And I think once you get to the Green Music Center, there'll be signs pointing you towards the event. Then I've sent you all an email, which you may or may not have seen, about a program tomorrow called Turning Away from Hate. It's tomorrow in the Cooperage at 7:30. The speaker is T.J. Lydon, who was a neo-Nazi white supremacist. He was also an activist in that movement, and he recruited young people into the organization, and he had a profound change of heart, and he's going to be talking about his own journey to turn away from hate and how he began teaching tolerance. The email said that anybody who will come and sign the sign-up sheet can get attendance credit for the lecture series. That'll make up if you've been unfortunate enough to have to miss one of our lectures. So tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. in the Cooperage. I'm really pleased to be able to present to you Christina Radich. Christina has written, along with a co-author and her sister, a wonderful book about her mother's experiences as a young woman in Holland during the war. Her books will be available for purchase. They're $15. Christina will be glad to meet with you and to autograph your copy. It's a wonderful book. I had it for a while and then said, well, I really must read this book, and I sat down and read it over the course of an evening. Couldn't put it down. It's really a fascinating story, and we are very, very pleased to have Christina here, and she will be talking about her mother's childhood in Holland during the war. So I ask you all to give a special welcome to a very brave Christina Radich. Thank you.
I am brave. Thank you, Myrna. I'm also short. I have heels on. Good afternoon. I'm so glad you all could make it. I've been coming to this lecture series for a few months now, and I think about all of you attending it, and not only attending the lecture series and actually sitting through it, but enduring the overwhelming quality of this topic. You probably struggle with who to speak with about it. It's just like, oh, what'd you learn in the Holocaust thing today? You know, I mean, how many people ask you that, and how willing are you to relate what you have learned? It's pretty sobering. It's sobering. It's a reality. It's a reality at present. Essentially, anything can happen. When my mother was interviewed by the San Francisco Holocaust Oral History Project, at the end of the interview, she was asked, "Do you think this could happen again?" And she said, "Right in front of your nose. Right in front of your nose." And so what I'll be talking about is the resistance. I don't know if you've had any kind of coverage of a resistance movement yet, but I'll talk about that, her involvement. I'll talk about her recovery during peacetime, and how it affected me. How did it affect me? When I started hearing these stories, I thought, we got to write a book. And my mom laughed. She says, oh, you know, there are people that have had much worse and more fascinating stories than me. You know, that's ridiculous. I would like to acknowledge the people who encouraged her to talk about it, and those being Dr. Paul Benko, pivotal, absolutely a pivotal person. Dr. John Steiner at a chance meeting in 1980 at a graduation at SSU. And myself, of course, because of the interest I had and how it just, it's just amazing. I mean, when you look at this person, this is a salt and pepper haired woman in a muumuu, right? This is from the VHS interview at the Holocaust Oral History Project. And so you can see that she's very uncomfortable. You're going to run into that. If you interview anybody, you're going to run into that discomfort, long silences. But what you have to do is win their trust and be earnest and let them go at their own pace. And those are some of my suggestions. The book might be a good outline for you as well to do that. But so here, this is my mom. She had asthma in her later years, so she's on prednisone and her face is a little puffy, but this is how she was in 1990. This is how she was just before the war began. This was a school picture. I think she's probably about 8 or 9 years old. The war began when she was 9. Chaos. You remember 9/11? Chaos, absolute, the whole country. You didn't know what to expect. I was hearing reports that the Golden Gate Bridge was bombed. It was just incredible. The taxidermist obviously goes to that school. This is Holland, normally an ink spot. This rendition, it's a really big country, but it's a very small country, and it's wedged by ocean. It's almost underwater, and it has Belgium on one side, and then whatever Germany is now. This is the map that I used in the book. But my mother was from Rotterdam. Bingo. Rotterdam. And that was one of, if not the largest port in the world at the time. Massive amounts of goods went through there, and all countries came through that port. And that was my mother's hometown. So she's at her school with her, stuffed buddies. And this is her father. His name is Martin van Dalen, and he married Mama. He married Mama. Mama is Apollonia Helena van Dalen. She was von Eyck at the time, but Apollonia Helena, that could have been my name. But my mother said it was such a big name and you were such a small kid. I took this picture in 2005, and we did a black and white to show it could have been taken in 1930, easily. And this was her house, a row house, sandwiched in between other row houses, and it goes all the way down the street. Still there. These are still there. This is the Searchlight Squad. My grandfather is the only one with goggles. And those goggles are because he had a BMW motorcycle with a sidecar. And they went around all the time. And my mother, I'm sorry, and my mother, her spot was in the sidecar, right? And they were a team. I mean, you know, inseparable. She would go and he'd say, "You want to operate the Searchlight?" And it's just like, oh, cool. So this was his squad. This is how they invaded. They came to you in your hometown. Wow. And interestingly enough, during the mobilization in 1938, Holland built all kinds of bunkers, all kinds of fortresses for big guns, howitzers, or whatever they were in Holland, and accommodated their troops. Well, after these paratroopers landed, there were buses on the ground waiting for them, and they pushed out the Dutch army and they occupied it. So it was just like, you know, out with the old regime and in with the new. Boom. It was pretty well orchestrated, extremely well orchestrated. And this was the result. They bombed, after the mayor surrendered, they bombed for days and days and days. Just wave after wave after wave. And I'm just trying to imagine the sound. Just imagine the sound. Imagine the confusion. Everyone's scrambling around, if they can. My mother did say that she and her mom had to run and find out how their relatives were doing. So they dodged snipers. They went from portico to portico one day until they arrived at their Oma's house, who scolded them, saying, "What are you, nuts?" But she said people, half-burnt bodies were hanging out the window. There was a period of time where she had to douse her handkerchief with perfume so that she, you know, can handle the smell. The stench was unbelievable. Enter this agent. This is about 1941, and things were starting to settle down. People were going back to school. The new government was taking hold. The NSB, the National Socialist anyway, the NSBers, the National Socialist Movement, they started in 1931, and as the possibility of invasion crept forward and became more imminent, their enrollment went up. And so people didn't want to be, you know, on the wrong side. So they were joining this National Socialist Movement. In 1941, identity cards were required for all Dutch citizens. And, well, let me go back. That gentleman arrived at my mother's house one day. She didn't know who he was, didn't recognize him. And turns out he was from the resistance. And he spoke with Mama. I'll call her Mama. And Mama and he, you know, sorted things out. And so Mama became involved with this resistance, unbeknownst to my mother. Now, mind you, my grandfather was out of town right now. Nobody knows where he was. This is Mama, one of her ID card photographs. This is the back door. This is how they snuck people in. And this is an old photograph, and I actually found this place with this old photograph. It's just phenomenal. It was amazing. History detectives, thank you so much. So the ID cards were developed, and you were photographed, and the information was on these registry cards. These were from the Bürgersachen, the Hall of Records. And so every family, every person in Holland needed to register. When they registered, not only was their date of birth, their, here we go, this is their gender, this is, I don't know, I can't read Dutch. All you Dutch speakers out there, can you read that, Hendrik?
Yeah, that VR means a woman.
The V means
The
vrouw,
Frau.
and then this one?
And then the DR is daughter.
Oh, okay. That would be my
And
mother.
then M is for man.
Okay. And then these are their birth dates. This is where they were born. This, I believe, is the wedding date. And there's also a backside. And the backside is really important because it not only has the address, it also has the category of religion. So when the Germans got a hold of these cards, they knew. They did not bomb these official buildings because they needed those cards to make positive identification of who was Jewish and who was not Jewish. And these are representatives of the cards. Now, this I got from the Verzets Museum in Amsterdam. I highly recommend going to Amsterdam. Go to the museum, and it's called the Resistance Museum, and you can see a wonderful diorama, and it takes you through the whole war chronologically. This was a postcard, and it shows the same person 2 times. Pretty good, huh? One is forged, one is real. And I believe that the person is a man, is a boy. And so the female, you know, they covered up the Adam's apple quite well. So, styling, huh? So, the operation that my mother and her mom were involved with was to hide people. The resistance had 2 sections. One section was the guerrilla saboteurs. They would bomb the records buildings. They would bomb, you know, whatever they can bomb, you know, bomb it to foil the occupying army. And then the second facet is the people who aided people in hiding, forged papers, fed these people in hiding, would shuttle them out, you know, in anything, in a suitcase, for God's sakes, you know. So this is the part of the resistance that my mother and my grandmother were involved with. So they would house people overnight. It was just like a way station. They would just constantly go through the house overnight, 1 night, 2 nights. When the war started to be an air war, in other words, all kinds of warfare was going on with pilots and planes, then they had pilots that got shot down and needed to get back to England. So that happened for a long time. And this is how they got in, through the back door. Also, the resistance, the way it was divided was amongst the regions of the country. You had alias names, and you were affiliated with a certain region. And those regions were, that's where the administrators were that would give you your orders and your directions and whatever kind of spy work that you had to do. I asked my mother how many false identities she had. She said 4. And I said, oh, what were they? She said, I don't remember. So my mother and her mom were down in Limburg here, but they were living up here. So why that happened, I don't know. I don't have that segment. I don't have that piece of the puzzle. That's another reason why it's good to ask whoever you can ask as soon as you can ask, because you never know what's going to happen. This was just after the war. I believe she was 14 or 15 right here. At one point she said, I traded in my little Bobby Sox shoes for a set of high heels so I could look more adult. Does that look like an adult to you? She tried. She even started smoking, okay? And this was her Oma. There was one point where she and her mother had a particularly risky assignment, and after that, if they were to be seen together, they would have been shot on, shoot first, ask questions later, that kind of a thing. So they were separated. So my grandmother and my mom were separated at that point. And because my mother was alone, she had to stay with her Oma. After the war, she stayed with her Oma. And she described herself as being pretty much of a wild child. She took care of herself during the war. Survived it. That's no small feat. But her Oma was so troubled with not being able to control her that she told the authorities, and my mother was put in jail. So this is after the war, right? Okay? Holland was a mess. The rail lines were completely out of sorts. Everything was just a struggle. It was like this. So her father surfaced in Sweden, and he sent a telegram just on the outside chance through the Red Cross saying, I'm in Sweden, come to Sweden if you're alive. She got this telegram, and she was in Sweden as soon as she could get to Sweden. There was food there, there were flowers there. April this month is the anniversary of the liberation of Holland as well, FYI. So this was her after all those experiences during the war. I'm not telling you all the experiences because I'd be here forever. This is her father. He managed to get an assignment on merchant ships, so he became a merchant marine. By the way, I met him once in San Pedro. This is his new wife. It devastated my mom. She thought that when they reunited, it would be just them, and then there's this other woman. So that was tough. That was really hard on her. So she went ahead and decided that she was going to start her own family. Thank you very much. So she did. She got a husband, she got a house, she got a baby. And this is my half-brother, as it turns out. That marriage didn't last long. They struggled. They really did. This is an important picture. This is a turning point picture because it was taken in Norway, where my father and mother met. This was taken in 1955 by my father, John Radich. And just think of everything that she had experienced. It's just all weighing on her shoulders. All the burdens. She couldn't speak with her dad about it because her dad didn't want to talk about it. He just couldn't bring up that stuff. You see, when you ask people to remember something, they would prefer to remember positive stuff. Grandpa Jack. Now, how many times has he told that story? Over and over. Oh my God, here he comes again with that story already. He's talking about the stuff that puts him, with a positive spin. But if you ask people to talk about memories that are negative, they relive it. And that's the challenge. They relive it. It's really, a challenge. So here she is in 1955 with a new husband. My sister's on the way, and my dad doesn't want to stay in Norway because he's from Southern California. It's cold in Norway. So they come to this country, and she decided that, okay, I step on this ship, I leave all that behind me. Nice thought. Didn't happen. Family tree, rough sketch, family tree. I needed to chart it. I couldn't keep this all together. So it would be handy for you to chart too. My mother is Alusia Lorena von Dahlen. And her mother, it's crossed out, but it shouldn't be. That's Apolloni Helena and Martin von Dahlen, my grandfather. And my grandmother was one of 12, and my grandfather was one of 10. And imagine all the cousins and oh my God, nieces and nephews. But out of all these people, it was just my mother, her mother, and my grandfather who were involved with the resistance. The reason that I have this display here is to try and give you a sense of the very controlled, the very sedate, the way Dutch people generally are, is they're orderly, they're appropriate, they follow directions, they're intimidated by authority. So they tried to keep everything, nifty keen, nice and tidy. A cup of tea at 4 o'clock, national tea time, and of course the tulips, orange. Orange is the color of Holland, right? William of Orange. So this is her family, her legacy. She's the only child. She was the only child. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about her PTSD. Are you familiar with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Shell shock, all kinds of other things. What was the other, the last one? Was Desert Storm people. They had that kind of thing going too. It's real. It takes the rest of your life to figure out what just happened, what this is all about, and sense of it, and to find meaning in your survival. It takes the rest of your life, and so you do the best you can. You try. What my mother decided, she would become an alcoholic. So systematically, she would line up these shot glasses, and okay, last night I had 4. I'll have 5 tonight. It didn't work. She tried, living, having a new family. She tried all kinds of things. It just didn't work. She had migraine headaches. She woke up in cold sweats with nightmares. I said, well, where was Dad? Oh, sleeping right next to me, snoring away. Okay. So she became introduced to the possibility that she could change. And that was very significant. But up until that time, she was stuck with her memory. She was stuck with her burdens. How was it living with a person like this? In Southern California, and she went from the horrors of war to the horrors of American suburbia. Mm-hmm. Tupperware parties, PTA meetings, is the bus driver good enough? Things like this. She went to a toy party. She brought toys. She said, I didn't realize that you go to a toy party to buy toys, and I'm coming there with all these toys in my arms. She walked around in her brand new tract home, feeling completely empty, looking for some meaning, some purpose. The relationship was on the skids. They divorced. Eventually, my parents divorced, and she progressively started to turn within. And I'll just let you, let your imagination figure out what that might be. But when she first started talking to me about these experiences, we were in India. Why were we in India? I was 14, and she said, there's somebody I want to meet in India. Do you want to go with me? And my question was, do I get out of school? And she says, yeah, I have to take you out of school. I'm there. So we go to India, and 2 weeks into India, I mean, those 2 weeks could be a whole book on itself. But I'm asking her, why are we here? Why did you want to come here? And that's when she started to open up. She says, you know why I have this really bad reaction to the poverty here? Every temple in India has a good luck symbol on it. It's a swastika. It's reversed, but it's an ancient good luck symbol. She's freaking out, you know. So she tells me, and she starts opening up. And it's at that point that I realize, wow, I had no idea. And I asked her, why didn't you tell me this earlier? She says, I was hoping I could. I was hoping someday I could tell you. So this is why people don't talk. They relive it when they open up about that. Excuse me. Let me revert to here. Here. So in 2004, 10 years after my mother died, her last request was that I take her ashes to the Ganges River. I did that. That was pretty phenomenal. I couldn't have done that without her, you know, tutoring all those years. So how can I conclude this? It's gonna. I guess the best thing I can tell you is that when you see people, I think I have one more slide here. There she is. She's a lot lighter. She's a lot lighter. She's done a lot of work on herself. She went to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross workshops. It's all personal. I mean, everybody's individual. They do what they have to do, you know, to make sense of it. But this is how I remember her. She loved to laugh. She really did. Now I think we can run the DVD, and this is a 10-year anniversary celebration of the Holocaust Oral History Project in San Francisco. And Charles Corral from the Sunday Morning sent a film crew out to tape this. So I'd like you to watch this now.
Speaking the unspeakable is something that has to be done sometimes. In a court of law, for instance, the victim surely would rather not tell, and the jury would rather not hear the details of a monstrous crime, but justice demands the particulars. Even on a pleasant summer evening among friends, justice demands the particulars. At a gathering at the Hebrew Academy of San Francisco, prayers were said, though this was not a prayer service. Nor was a concert in the offing, though there was music to accompany a program of dramatic readings.
Isaac, David, Ruth, Joshua.
But then those gathered together here were not gathered for the readings either, really.
All gone. The towns, the villages.
This is what drew them. The past did. The past, transcribed on paper and filed in folders. The past, recorded on videotape and set upright on steel shelves.
Yeskor Elohim, May God remember the souls of our brethren in the
For 10 years now, the Holocaust Oral History Project of San Francisco has been piecing together the past out of scattered bits of living memory.
Their memories do we pledge.
900 survivors of the Holocaust have told their stories now. In a cabinet is a video cassette with the name Paul Becklo on its spine.
And then they heard us in the cattle cars. They told us to pick up our belongings, and they were extremely brutal. People were getting beaten, bloody, and then we started the journey to Auschwitz.
Another cassette has Gloria Lyon's name on it.
By that time, more than half of us were dead, and the rest of us were ill and simply beyond ourselves. We were all very sick and weak and dazed.
Sometimes with horses, sometimes.
What Helen Farkush remembers, others can now hear and see.
So they put the sick ones in the wheelbarrows and we had to push them. It was a terribly cold night. The snow was frozen, it was very slippery, it was very hard to walk.
When the war began, Lakshmi Radich was a child of 10 who was not a child.
My little girlness was left behind after May 10th, 1939. I was not a little girl anymore.
The memories of Max Garcia are recorded here. Max Garcia of Holland and of Auschwitz.
You have a tattoo?
Yeah.
You want to read your number?
139, 829. Nou, dat is in Polish. 139, 829. 139, 829.
If there's one thing I'm nervous about tonight, it's that I won't be able to express how much I care about all of you.
Lanny Silver began the Oral History Project 10 years ago. It seemed to her that as terrible as these stories were to hear, and as terrible as they were to tell,
So tragic.
it would be far more terrible not to tell them.
Sometimes I would try to turn off the videotape or the audio tape when people would start to cry, and the survivor would pull back my hand and say, "These tears are part of the story."
They selected and pre-selected the pregnant ones, the fat ones, and they gassed them. The fat ones, they used the fat for soap.
So many died. They were burning all the time.
We looked there and we saw a woman standing and blood on the snow. She was having a baby, standing on her feet. She had no way of keeping it alive. She had no way of feeding it, bundling it.
Being an interviewer means getting the story so the world will know what happened. It's about asking questions that sometimes feel like knives, opening wounds.
What's hardest to talk about?
Can you read?
And he couldn't stand up. He could not stand up. And I wasn't strong enough to hold him up. And they came with whips and chased us off. And that's the last time I saw my father.
What I have told you is not 1% of what I saw. There are not words to describe it all.
On this 10th anniversary of the Oral History Project, there were awards and testimonials, and many heartfelt thanks to the volunteers who have kept the project going.
She's an extraordinarily driven person with great results, and I think we should all tell her that we love her. I love you, Lena. You're a great lady.
It is just impossible to comprehend the loss of such a large number of people.
The mayor of San Francisco sent his Human Rights Commissioner to address the gathering. But then Deborah Pell might just have come on her own. She has memories too.
I was about 7 years old, and I was sitting on my father's lap, and we were going through this book someone had given me for collecting stamps. And there at the bottom of the page was a row of stamps, all with the face of Adolf Hitler. And I will never forget my father, a normally gentle and very even-tempered man, took his pen out of his pocket and began to cross out the row of stamps with fierce strokes.
In Dachau, I met Danish students who had been arrested because of student riots, and they were the only people who shared food packages. The Danish students were the greatest reaffirmation that there is really a sane world out there.
As a child of Holocaust survivors, I've gotten a lot more out of this project than I've ever given. You've taught me how to listen. You've taught me what's important in life. You remind me of who I am and where I come from.
So it went that evening in San Francisco at the Hebrew Academy. There were people there who could show you exactly on a map where hell once was, and what real line took them there with millions of others who did not come back.
He survived to bear witness to what has happened to our so-called civilization.
But for one another, they might say what the messenger said to Job of the Bible, "And I only am escaped alone to tell thee." If there is unimaginable cruelty in the world, there is also unimaginable strength. That, and a warning, is what they only are escaped alone to tell us.
We were in a concentration camp together 45 years ago. Yes, and we didn't see each other for 40 years. Never would recognize each other. There were three sisters, we were three sisters. We stayed with right about across from each other. So we're so glad to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Corralt. A couple of follow-ups. I would not have been able to present this to you without the help of Mel Fisk. You meet people in your life, special people that are encouraging and take an interest, and Mel was definitely that person, and he brilliantly compiled actual dialogue interviews that my mother had done in his book. So thank you, Mel. Also, too, Lonnie Silver in the film, she's no longer with us. I learned that she passed away not that long ago. So what I'd like to do now is open it up to questions and answers. I know that I haven't filled in every single little tidbit, so if you have any questions. Raise your hand and I will identify you. Yes, my dear.
I'm curious, you said that your father was in Norway and had another wife. And he thought that his wife was dead and remarried, or was he a polygamist?
Oh, no. He wanted to be a polygamist. No, actually, he didn't have another wife. I'm sorry, I confused you. My mother had another husband. She was married once before. So let me clear it up. My dad was not married.
Your grandfather.
My grandfather, yes. My grandfather remarried. So what happened to his first wife? I filed a missing persons report with the International Tracing Service in Bad Arolsen to find out what happened to my grandmother. She's still missing.
And this is the
Yeah, Mama and my mother worked together as resistance fighters. Does that help? Do we need another chart? I think we need another chart.
Well, could you explain who Oma was?
Oma, Apollonia, or the older, yes, the other Oma. That was Grootmoeder. Grootmoeder was my grandfather's mother. So she died at 92. She endured 2 world wars. Amazing woman, amazing woman. Yes?
Is there it is very, very obvious that your mother was marked by this experience. Did she ever tell you anything that had happened to her that you sensed was really difficult for her to tell you? A specific incident?
Oh, yes.
Would you be willing to share one?
I did not conduct that interview. My sister Lorena conducted that interview. And at that time, when they began to talk, just a couple of sentences into it, my mother asked for the tape recorder to be turned off. She wasn't ready to make it public yet. And that's, I got a smidgen of that. And it's just these experiences that cause us shame. Maybe we should have known better. We should have done things differently. And I think that was kind of what was going on there. So I don't really know the specifics. Yes, sir.
GP, maybe you could describe for them the paucity of photographs that you have in your book and the difficulty you had in collecting.
Oh, thank you. My mother came to this country without much, but she did bring the suitcase.
Which is made of paper, which when she purchased it, at the end of the war, it was used. But I'm told that in the moist climate of Holland, you can get more stuff in these things.
So that's one thing. But the photographs, yes, those were possessions that, especially the ones with the paratroopers and the bombed out buildings, that was a method that the resistance used to convey the devastation across the country because there was an information blackout. And so these pictures were mass produced, those in particular, and people would hold on to them in their possession and show them around. If you were caught with those pictures, you would have been shot. The 2 remaining photographs of Mama that were seen are the only ones because they were at odds with each other. I mean, these 2 people, my mother and her mom, were at odds with each other. They didn't always get along, so my mother tore up all the pictures of her mom because she was pissed. So these 2 were remaining. I had just the best photographer in the whole wide world helping me on these photographs, and he's in this auditorium right now, so Tom Burnside. So everybody's going to buy a tape recorder, right, and go interview people? Yes?
Did you ever speak to your mother about maybe why her mother got involved in the resistance? Was it because of religious beliefs, or was it because of some moral stance? Certainly making that decision when you had a small child that you were the sole supporter of, and that put both you and your child at risk, was something that I'm not sure most people would be willing to do unless there was some rationale behind that.
Yeah, that's a point I wanted to bring up, thank you, because in this vast family, there were aunts and uncles who were Jewish. I mean, my grandfather was Roman Catholic. My grandmother, on the other hand, Mama, was Protestant. And they married they just married. I mean, they married the people that they fell in love with, and some happened to be Jewish. And so perhaps that was one of the reasons, because she saw, you know, her own family getting threatened, being threatened. To put your child at risk like that, yeah. I mean, that's the whole country was at risk. The whole country was at risk. Perhaps she felt that she had the skills to do something. And my mother, at one point in the book, and you'll love this story, it's about crossing the front in a leaky rowboat. She wanted to help out. She wanted to help the liberation. And so she went to the front line to help out. Come on, you guys. What's the problem? So, any other questions? Yes.
You said that when you went to India, that your mother was upset by the swastikas, but I don't recall you saying what the reason was for going to India and who you were there to meet.
That's the sequel. That's yet to be written. But I'll answer a couple of questions there. She met some people in her years living in Venice Beach who were, you know, involved with ashrams and such, and they mentioned that, you know, if you really want to talk to somebody that knows the meaning of life, she's living in India right now. And my mom sold her house and got the money together and made that journey because she didn't want to take somebody's word for it. She wanted to be the person to evaluate whether or not this person had the meaning of life. So she decided she was going to meet her. And she did. And I met her too. And went back a number of times. Yeah. Very, very profound. I mean, the India years is just, wow. Wow. Which is another reason, thank you for the segue, that we ended up in Sonoma County, is because they had an India Studies program once upon a time, and I needed to learn Hindi so I could speak the language, which I sort of did. Yes.
I just was, when I read your book, one of the things that struck me as kind of shocking and trying to think of how I would feel. You mentioned in that picture with the paratroopers coming down that there was buses waiting, and what you said in the book was, I mean, there were so many collaborators hidden, in a sense, the Dutch that welcomed the Nazis to come in, and I just thought, you know, what would that have been like to find out that maybe your next door neighbor was a secret Nazi all along and was now got to welcome the liberators, I guess, as they were, you know, calling the Nazis, and how awful that would have been for a country to have been overtaken that way, from the inside out almost.
Yeah. They came out of the Nazi closet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if your mom talked much about that or how that felt for those.
Suspicion was the key of the day. Yeah. Everyone was suspect. Everyone was suspect. Yeah, there were double agents. There were all kinds of people. People would turn in. Children were turning in parents. So it was pretty tricky. It was pretty tricky, yeah. Chaos. I mean, you know, first you confuse everybody, get a diversion going, and then when they're in a state of confusion, then you, I would like to finally say that I acknowledge the difficulty of a course like this, and I am profoundly moved to see so many people taking a course of this nature. It's the darker side of culture, of tribes, of societies, of any kind of group of people. So I hope that you understand that within those populations there are also people that are sincerely compassionate and take heart in that. Last thing I want to say too is that Mel Fisk, my co-author, was a staunch anti-war activist, and I think this particular piece was probably his best anti-war statement. If anybody knows that there are consequences to anyone seeing any action of whatever degree, there are consequences. So keep it in mind that you would never want to send your son anywhere, or your daughter, or anything like that, that they come home unrecognizable and damaged forever. Thank you for coming.
Christina's got some books, and she's willing to sell them to you and sign them. She's short, I'm tall. One thing I would like to point out that provoked for me some information that I remember from when I was writing about resistance movements during the war, and that was although there might have been collaborators in Holland, one of the reasons that that might have happened was after the First World War, Holland was the only country that put into effect a contingency plan for what would happen if they were ever invaded by the Germans again, or for that matter, any other country, although one wouldn't expect it from the Belgians or the French or the folks in Luxembourg or the Danes. And so the civil servants had instructions to cooperate with the occupying power. Now those instructions were put together without any kind of understanding of what that might mean from a Germany run amok. And so many civil servants cooperated with the German invaders without any sense of exactly what was going on. There were also Dutch Nazis. But you have to know, it's one of the things that I always remember. I read where the day after the Germans invaded Holland, there was a sea of orange throughout the country. Everybody put something orange on, wore an orange flower to indicate to themselves and also to the other people around them that there may be Germans who have invaded this country, but we are still Dutch. We are not German. We will not cooperate. So one of the reasons that there was a high death rate amongst Jews in Holland was because of this plan that was set in motion. But we have also learned from many people that many Dutch people were in the resistance and fought the Nazis and saved lots of Jews, including many children, one of whom is with us today. Hans? Christina's going to sign for the books. We'll see you all in this week. Don't forget, tonight in the Green Center, and tomorrow, extra credit if you want it, Turning Away from Hate. I'm sorry, Barbara.